Welcome to part two. I didn't realize that it was going to cut me off, but that's probably a good thing. You got to take a little break and click on the next link. So, we were talking about tradition of who becomes a justice in the federal court system. We normally look at leading attorneys, legal scholars, law school professors, former members of Congress, and state court judges, but it can be anyone. You could be appointed to be a Supreme Court judge, period. I mean, I think it's incredibly unlikely, but as far as I'm aware, and if I'm wrong, I'll check this by Friday. But as far as I'm aware, any one of you could be appointed to the Supreme Court. Now, I doubt you're going to get approved by the Senate, but as far as formal requirements go, there aren't any. So let's move on. Terms and pay. Justices who are appointed to the Supreme Court are appointed for life. Same thing with the appeals court and the district court. You serve for life. This is one of those checks and balances thing. So when you're putting this in here, serve for life. Each box, serve for life, serve for life. This is a check and balance. Yes, the executive branch gets to appoint justices to a system that after they're appointed, they're pretty much on their own. But a president has to be aware that the justices that he appoints are most likely going to outlast him. And so if he does a bad job, then his historical legacy is going to be tainted by putting a bad judge in place. So they serve for life. Now, that's not to say that they can't retire. Justices can retire. They can choose to leave. It's generally retirement or you leave in a box. And if they do something illegal, they can be impeached. Now, only 13 federal judges have ever been impeached. And by the way, impeached, if you don't remember, is to bring formal charges against a government official. Now, that's the first step in removing them from office. You have to bring the formal charges first, and then you can remove them from office if they're convicted. So of the 13 that have been impeached, only 7 have been convicted. So a little more than half. Now, if you serve on a special court, you serve for 4 to 15 years, and Congress determines what you get paid. Now, that said, they still get paid pretty well. If you're a Supreme Court justice, you make just under $200,000 a year. If, if you are the Chief Justice, you make the same amount as the Vice President, the Speaker of the House. So you can kind of see how this compares. They also get support staff, but we're really not going to be talking about this very much. You can look through this real quick if you want. Go ahead and pause the video if you're interested in what the support staff looks like for the courts, but it's not going to be on the test, and we're not going to take the time to really cover it. So let's talk about the inferior courts. We have the district courts, which are down here. These are the lowest level of the federal judicial system. There are 94 of them. So somewhere in this box, right, there are 94 district courts. Minimum 1 per state. Some states have more than one, obviously, because we have 50 states. There's also one in Washington, D.C. and Puerto Rico. Now, district courts hear the vast majority of federal cases. We're talking thousands of cases in these 94 courtrooms. And they have one judge who serves on the district court level. So, serve for life. 94 of them, at least 1 per state, including District of Columbia and Puerto Rico. Hear thousands of cases. generally have original jurisdiction. Those are things that you need down here in the district court box. The Court of Appeals was created in 1891 because the Supreme Court was getting all of the cases from the district courts. So we created another level to help the Supreme Court out because it was overloaded. It just couldn't do enough. It worked really well when we had 13 colonies or 13 states. Excuse me. But as our country expanded and there were more and more court cases, the Supreme Court just didn't have enough time to cover it. So there are 13 appeals courts. There's technically 12 in a military appeals court, but you can just remember the number 13. So for the sake of the notes, please put 12 regular appeals courts, 1 military appeals court. On each appeals court, there are 3 justices. So if you want to win your case, you have to convince at least 2 of the 3 justices to be on your side. This gives a little more oversight and makes it harder for justices to make a mistake or be corrupt because there's 3 of them. So if you find a problem with one justice, you can be reasonably certain that the other 2 justices will smooth things over and make sure that everything's okay. And they handle around 1,000 cases between the 13 of them. So district courts, you have thousands of cases. The appeals court over the course of a year handles about 1,000. And that means the Supreme Court, which has 9 justices on it, hears about 100. That's kind of the neighborhood that the Supreme Court hears. So let's look at how federal cases are appealed. You can see from this chart what I mean about the way that things are appealed. You can see here that you see all these special courts are listed on the same level as the district courts. And you can see that they all appeal up to basically the U.S. Court of Appeals or the appellate court. You could hear it called either one, except for the armed forces and also these small group veterans claims, federal claims court, international trade goes to its own court as well. But that one technically falls under the U.S. Court of Appeals as well. If you see right down here, state Supreme Courts go directly to the Supreme Court, and anything from this appellate level goes to the Supreme Court. All right, let's talk Supreme Court. Another thing you need to add to this box is this term, judicial review. Judicial review is a very important term that you have to know for the Supreme Court. It's the power to declare something unconstitutional. We'll talk a lot more about this. I don't care if you write down the definition in here because I didn't give you enough room, but make sure you've got judicial review. And if you want to add Marbury versus Madison next to judicial review, fine. But those are the things that you need to remember. We'll talk a lot more about this probably on Friday. You'll get really tired of Marbury versus Madison in judicial review before the Constitution test. I should also mention that this power judicial review, not in the Constitution. The Supreme Court gave itself this power. Most of the Supreme Court cases are heard from appeals. Very rarely are they heard as original jurisdiction. If you want your case to be heard by the Supreme Court, you have to convince 4 of the 9 judges to hear your case.